In deference to Bob, I will do my best to maintain language decorum.
Uh, I worked
Not
on
at
a
all
Wall,
worried about you.
I worked on a Wall Street trading floor. I have heard every iteration of the F word as noun, verb, adjective, adverb, and everything else. On a not just a daily basis, on a minute by minute basis.
Minute by minute.
Yeah, I get that. And
If you,
my wife grew up in the automotive business. Her mother was the general manager of a Ford dealership.
oh
And
my
it's a
goodness,
really cool story. She was the first GM of a Ford dealer in the United States that was female. Um, and so my wife has very creative language as well. Um, and I grew up with almost no supervision whatsoever. So, but I do occasionally try and respect others and not bomb off often.
if if
Yeah,
if
one
you
of the
read if you read Michael Lewis's first book, Liar's Poker,
I did.
very much still in the running as his best book for my thinking. But
Yeah.
I had the same job at Merrill that he had at Solomon Brothers.
Oh, wow.
So when he talks about the language, especially if you remember the character, the human piranha,
Yeah.
that's pretty par for the course.
I've heard that. And, coming out of college, I really wanted to go do bond trading. Um, and one of my cousins worked for a good friend. So I probably could have gotten an interview, but my wife was like, I'm not going to go live in New York City. It's just not going to happen. So I didn't.
Well, after
It didn't end up badly. I ended up at Accenture and was there all the way through the IPO. So
sorry.
after Solomon Brothers went south, I covered Louis Ranieri for a number of years in his asset.
That had to be interesting.
Ah, Lloyd.
Oh my goodness.
We had in those days computer screens and little boxes in the computer screen with the asset manager, the insurance company, or the pension fund's name, and you didn't have to pick up the phone. It would just flash when there was a call. All you had to do was touch the screen, which was astonishing technology for the time. Now it's like my grandchildren think it's antique, but and it would flash, and it was usually one of the traders or the portfolio managers, but once in a while it was Louis, and that was always fun.
Yeah, between that and Barbarians at the Gate, and there's some very interesting people in that business.
Indeed, there are.
Not in that business, but in the vein of colorful language, or it was called colorful language. Kirby Smart. If you've ever been in proximity of him coaching his team, it is another language of profanity. Like, it is an entire language that he uses out there on the field.
Boy.
And remarkably creative.
Remarkably creative. Yes, it is. Yeah, I was on the sidelines for a practice one day, and I was there actually with the first advisor that I was working for, and he had a son, and he looked up, and his son at the time was like 6 or 7. He looked up at his dad and he goes, "Dad, that coach has some really colorful language."
Yes, my youngest played D1 football, and he has a few stories to tell.
I'm sure you.
Where did he play, Bob?
Cal.
Okay, so yeah, wow.
In what was then the Pac-10.
Right.
Okay.
Which
now the Pac-1 or 2 or whatever.
The Pac-12, and it's now the Pac-2.
Right. Yeah, sadly. Yes.
Same son that has the Instagram that does the cooking?
Yes.
Yeah. very fun. I follow him now.
Yeah,
Yeah, I do too. I think you put something out, Bob, and I was like, okay, now I need to follow Bob's son as well.
he doesn't post much now. He's a tech CEO now, so
Yeah,
so he doesn't do that much.
yeah.
Yeah, he probably doesn't have time. Yeah,
Nope.
Well,
yeah. I remember those days.
Yes,
well, I
he and his
okay.
crew are here too.
That's awesome. I love it that all 17 of them are there.
Right now at the time, same time.
They will by nightfall.
That's amazing.
The oldest and his wife and three have been on a hiking trip all week. Um, here in the Adirondacks, there are 46 what they call high peaks. By Western standards, they're not that high, but they're high for here, and
Right.
over 4,000 feet is the delineation. Ironically, they missed one that's over 4,000, and one of the 46 is just under when the measuring got more accurate. But um, uh, there are 46, and my oldest is what's called a 46er. He's summited all 46
All
of
of
them,
them.
and his wife and the kids are working on it. So I think they hit 4 or 5 this week, and they should be here sometime after lunch, and then we'll have all 17.
Nice. That's awesome.
Well, Bob, I know as much of your story as I can know because I stay real close to figuring that out because I just appreciate who you are as a human. And uh, and insofar as that goes, I actually don't know much about your career path. um, which
Yeah, that's
I
boring.
nah, well, but I'm just so thankful that we get to have this conversation today. Glad you get to meet Mark. Mark is also one of my favorite humans on planet Earth. I like to um, surround myself with people who are genuine and are putting.
So how did you pick me
How
as
did I
part of
pick
that?
you?
No.
Yeah, you are who you are. We've just determined this, Mark. For better, for worse, you are who you are. And so, yeah, I know you. The premise of the podcast is really straightforward, and it's really mostly about this conversation and really just nailing down pieces of your story that are linked to how you got here. So, like, what is it about your past that maybe has created some of the turns or bumps or moments in the road where you took a path that then took a path and then took a path that got you here with 17 kids at your cottage house in the summer.
And regardless
So,
of all that, I want to hear about the singing waiter thing.
and
I
Mark
just
is
I
has to
have
know
to
about the
hear
singing
about that.
later. I'm so curious about too. So thank
Well,
you for being here.
well, that was probably my third job. My first job was Paperboy. I delivered. It was usually 126 papers every afternoon.
On your
It was
bike?
Yep. Well, except in the winter. Uh, one of the winters, because I grew up near Buffalo, and one of the winters it was uh, in excess of 15 below for 2 weeks straight, and there was way too much snow to ride my bike, so I had to walk it. And of course, it was uphill both ways.
Of course.
Oh, you were walking on your hands with the paper bag strung from your foot,
Yes,
correct?
Yeah.
exactly,
Just trying to make sure I understood this context.
exactly. Uh, but I that was an interesting job, and we were
Of
we
course,
were
hardworking
independent
job, sir.
contractors, of course, and we had to pay our bill every week for the papers, whether we collected the money or not. And so it meant I had to be pretty relentless about knocking on doors and getting paid. But I think the biggest thing I learned from it was simply, uh, show up and be on time, because the papers needed to get there. And if the papers didn't arrive on time, people started calling the newsstand where we got the papers, and that was a problem. Once in a great while, there was a press problem, and the papers showed up late because the presses had a problem. But far more likely, it was the Paperboy's problem. And
So were you paid on delivery every time? There was no
they
subscriptions at that
they
time?
paid for a weekly subscription. It was a small town paper, so it was the Dunkirk Evening Observer, and it was published Monday through Saturday. There was no Sunday edition, so I had to deliver 6 days a week. Typically, I collected on Saturday morning in arrears, and it was in those days 10 cents a paper at the newsstand. You got 6 days delivered to your house for 50 cents. And you got a bargain for subscribing. And so it was my job to knock on doors and collect 50 cents every Saturday morning before I would then, I could pretty much get to every house between 9 and 12 and have time to have lunch and then deliver the Saturday afternoon paper, which was small, so you could fold those into squares and really heave them.
You could frisbee the paper there.
Absolutely, and I did.
Yeah.
And when the weather was good and I was on my bike, I could get 120, and not counting folding time, but once I'd folded the papers and gotten on the bike, I could be done inside half an hour. And that was, the route was, I think, about 2.5 miles. But
I'm rethinking all of my Paperboy days on Nintendo, Bob. Like, this is where I am in my mind right now. What's that Bob on the bike? Did I just not know it?
Yep. And then the question was whether you frisbee like this or whether you throw it like this. And I usually threw it like this, because you could get it a whole lot farther. And I threw pretty well. But the the traditional frisbee motion, I know some people throw frisbee like that, but the traditional frisbee motion is more accurate. And so if the porch was close enough that I wanted to make sure I was accurate, I would traditional frisbee it, but otherwise I would give it a heave.
So did you break any windows?
I didn't.
Okay, good.
I missed a fair number of times, which slowed me down.
Because it has to go on their porch.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there were
any dogs? Any dog stories?
Yeah, well, not any real stories.
Okay.
But some of them insisted that the paper be put between the doors. They didn't want it on the porch. Sometimes it was because a neighbor would steal it. But some of them said no, I want it in the mail slot. Some said no, I want it in the mailbox, even though the U.S. Postal Service said that was illegal. And
you just had to know all these details.
Some people wanted it at the side door. It sounds way more imposing than it was. You just did it every day, so you knew what it was.
Yeah. That's awesome. So that was your first job. How old were you then?
Oh, when I started, if I remember correctly, you had to be 12, and I think I was 12.
That sounds about right. We were doing some similar things, except in Northern Virginia with the Washington Post. So
That was a bigger thing.
on Sundays you had a big wagon because the papers were 3 or 4 inches thick, and we were in Arlington County, and we were delivering, I don't know, 350 papers. It was a dense neighborhood. You didn't do that in 30 minutes.
No, certainly not on Sunday.
Oh heck no! On Sundays, it was it started I think 4 a.m. and finished at 7.
Yeah.
But same thing. If the paper wasn't there by 7 a.m., you were getting phone calls.
Fortunately,
Or
there
at least
were
the
cell
Post
phones
was.
then, or it would have been worse.
Right. Well, the Post got the calls, and then when you got home, you got them.
Yeah.
Which parents weren't real excited about.
I can imagine. Well, a few decades later, my first job was as a waitress um, at a little restaurant in town. So um, I have no experiences as a paperboy to add to this, other than my Nintendo playing.
There you go.
Thanks for the few decades jab, by the way. That's much appreciated.
I'm embarrassed to tell you I've never played Nintendo.
Never.
The only reason I have is
never
my
played it after they started to do other things, but I love
the only
it.
reason I have is my wife is a Nintendo junkie, and we actually have an original machine
Yeah.
with Duck Hunt and all of that. I know that it's actually a pretty valuable antique. It still
does.
works.
That's awesome.
She
I
brought
played.
that to our marriage.
That's great. I played the Atari at my grandparents' house as a kid. And we all the way up until that thing we would blow on it and like put it in, put it out, put it in, put it out, like and shake it a little bit, jab it, like we would do all that until that no longer worked. We played it every Christmas. But yeah, Nintendo had a fantastic game, Bob, called Paperboy, and you would ride your bike through the streets and fling your newspapers, and you would get more points if they landed in the news. Like there's a newspaper box at the house, you would get
Yep.
more points if it landed there. You would get some points if it landed on the porch. You would get no points if it landed in the yard. You would lose points if
You
you
broke
broke a
one.
window.
Yeah.
And then every once in a while, dogs would chase you. So very exciting game. I feel like even though I didn't do it personally, I feel like I lived the life of a paperboy.
That's pretty actually consistent with real life. So I'll take it. My second job was umpiring Little League Baseball.
Aw.
That was your second job? When did you do that?
When I was 14.
You were umpiring Little League Baseball when you were 14 years old.
Behind the plate.
I love it.
Oh, the favored spot. Oh my goodness.
What ages?
9 to 12.
Okay, so they were pitching.
Oh yeah, in those days, our town had 6 teams, and way more kids wanted to play than teams, so making a team was a big deal. And 9-year-olds had to face 12-year-olds, and I remember when I was 9, facing the 12-year-olds was pretty scary stuff. Once in a while, there'd be a 6-footer with arm hair.
Were you a little kid?
I was tiny. I went to high school at 5 feet and 1/4 inch. I got to 5'3" as a sophomore, 5'7" as a junior, 6'2" as a senior, and I grew a little more in college.
Yeah.
But yes, I was small, but I umpired a lot of games. I always preferred behind the plate. Partly I preferred to be in charge. And partly was you got $3 for umping behind the plate. You only got $2 for the bases. So I wanted to make the big bucks. And
What'd you do with the money back then?
I'd like to say I invested it in the S&P 500, and I'm now a billionaire today. But it was mostly soda and baseball cards.
much more appropriate,
I was about to
age
say very
appropriate
fitting.
for sure.
Very fitting. Very
It,
fitting.
it,
And I
but
later,
but realistically, you've been entrepreneurializing it for quite a while, like from
Mm-hmm.
the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
and I refereed basketball after that, um,
Do you
which
like that more or less?
different.
Different.
Um,
Okay.
it's harder to be good in basketball, refereeing, especially if you're not doing it all the time. At least that was true for me. Because in
Because of
base,
so much court coverage, you had to
partly
monitor so many
partly
things.
so much court coverage, partly because it's relentless, right? It the
Hmm.
action is much
Right.
more continuous, and
Yeah.
especially if you're umpiring in baseball, if you have something in your eye, you can tell the pitcher to hold the ball.
Right.
You hold the hand up and say time and
Right.
fix it, and or you walk out and brush off the plate, and in basketball, it's much harder to do. Plus, there are so many more calls or potential calls, right?
Right.
Um, and
Sure.
and and they're harder to see, right? A,
Yeah.
a close ball strike call um, can be difficult, but that's really about it. Close play at a
Mm-hmm.
base or at home plate. But most calls are really straightforward, um, and so for me, basketball refereeing was harder. Um, if you said, you know, what 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 lessons do I take to today? There are probably two. One, have the courage of your convictions because you have to. If you make the call weakly, nobody's going to believe you,
Yeah.
and it's going to make your job that much worse. Um, and and I know that from the other side. I was once a varsity baseball coach, and uh, I knew how I reacted to umpires based on how
How they called it.
how they called it.
Yeah.
So now we have to go down the rabbit hole of the varsity baseball coach. So we've got singing waiter, we've got paperboy, we've got referee in multiple sports, and not to mention chief investment officer.
I was a lawyer.
How does all how does say that again?
I was a lawyer too.
Singing, lawyer, waiter. Okay, now I need to see the thread here. Can you just not keep a job?
Yeah, that's part of it. I'm also old, so I really liked coaching, and I coached a lot. I
See
coached
that?
my kids, and um, I never took any money for it. Um, when I when the high school jobs were paid, I was fortunately in a position where I could donate the money back to the program for better equipment or better uniforms or whatever. And anyway, it was great fun, and I miss it. I do not coach now, and initially I had thought I could coach again when I coached my grandchildren, but the problem is I have 9 and they all
Which one?
play. At least all the ones who are old enough play. So 7 play, and you know most weekends, most of the year, I go to at least 7 games,
Right.
at least
Yeah.
at least as the schedule permits.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
uh, there are now 5 of them that in California we would have called it club sports. In Virginia they call it traveling sports,
Hmm.
um, where they play all over. Uh, Grandson number 3 got up here to the cottage late because he was playing in Virginia Little League tournament. They made it to the state semifinals and lost
Oh.
1-0 to the eventual winner.
Okay. Oh, wow.
But so he was he got up here a couple weeks later than he would have because they kept winning. And the family behind the scenes was hoping for basically what we got, which was a really close loss because they had started relatively close to home. Then they moved down into Shenandoah for the state tournament. And if they had won there, they would have had to go to North Carolina for the regional tournament and start missing a whole lot of the summer. And
Yeah.
none of us wanted that, but we didn't want to say that, of course.
Of course not.
So,
Hey, son, it's wonderful for you to be successful, but you're eating into my fun time.
exactly. Because we like it when we have all 17 of us here.
My wife is from a family like that, and they really enjoy those large get-togethers.
Yeah, there will be. I suspect there will be some pretty aggressive King of the Raft wars in the next couple of days, and
for sure, yeah.
The canoes and the kayaks will be out in force.
Yeah,
we'll have fun.
That's awesome. How much acreage do you have up there?
Not much, but we have 100 feet of lakefront.
That's what really matters. Yeah, sure. And your dock remained detached despite the storms.
It held on. Yeah, if people who are listening, we had a tornado here on Tuesday. National Weather Service confirmed more than 100-mile-an-hour winds. So we were without power. We got it last night finally. So it was like 2.5 days, which is even worse than it sounds up here because everything is electric. There are no gas lines to the cottage, and water is by a well, and a well has an electric pump.
Right.
Yeah.
So we had,
nothing.
We had to take buckets from the lake to flush toilets and, get ice when and where we could to try to salvage food. And, it's pretty much a first world problem, right? Yeah, I had trouble at my vacation cottage, but it was still a hassle.
I remember as a kid.
Understood. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a well. The house I grew up in, lived out in the country, and when the power went out, if they could anticipate the power going out, if we knew there was a storm coming, like all the bathtubs would be filled, as a way to have water available for toilets and bathing and whatever's needed.
And it meant, obviously no internet also, but even no cell phone service, because here in the sticks, the coverage is terrible. Verizon sells a box extender that they don't advertise. I think because when I bought it, it was like $250, but there's no monthly fee to it, so they don't like you to have it. And
right,
it plugs into the internet and then uses GPS to pull in to get service. And when you first put it in, it takes like 90 minutes to find the right, the closest tower or whatever. But then it locks in, and we have 4 bars all the time. But we didn't have that either. So
right,
and there for a while there were trees down across the road, both directions, and there's only one way in or out. So we were stuck for a while. Fortunately, the people up here are pretty well experienced with that, and they got the roads cleared by the next morning.
Yeah.
And then the power guys got to work, and we heard a lot of chainsaws.
That's not bad.
I can imagine that. I was going to say, I'm guessing a few of your neighbors are chainsaw equipped and were probably out there slicing up trees.
Having the time of their life. Do not downplay this. I mean,
Oh,
they were,
I love playing with chainsaws
yeah,
personally.
there were some people having the best day of the year, I'm sure, with
At
their
one point,
chainsaw.
a few years ago, we had taken our son to space camp down in Huntsville, and we were in Alabama playing golf on the Robert Trent Jones Golf Trail, and my wife was worried about tornadoes, and as it so happens, one went through the backyard of our house over by the University of Richmond and took down a 92-foot tree that was in our yard.
Ooh.
Which went straight across I had a Volkswagen GTI at the time, and
Oh,
it
so you're okay.
bisected it right down the middle. So I spent a good 4 days cutting that tree up when I got home, and it was actually a lot of fun.
You didn't want firewood for quite a while.
We had firewood forever. That literally probably the remainder of the time we owned that home. It was this huge old oak tree, and it went straight down our driveway.
Well, I sent you both pictures of the porch boat floating by attached to the rafts.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna go dig those out right now.
That's so great.
I just got to see them.
And then three little old ladies went out in kayaks to steer the porch boat to safety.
Oh,
Because apparently the owner of the boat wasn't at the cottage,
yeah.
and so it was just tied up, and so
It's actually pretty amusing, Jess. When you get a moment, you should go.
Okay.
Somebody could make some sort of fun movie out of this. There's a story to be told for sure. It's a pretty good shot of the tree
All right. Well,
problem
I'll have to go
as
look
well.
at that. I don't want to mess up my phone setup, but
That's
I'll
probably
have to
now
check
is
that
not the
out.
time. We'll have to
Bob,
include those in the show notes.
that's right. We'll include the boat pictures in the show notes. That's great. Um, okay. So I was thinking about this earlier when you were talking about coaching. Coaching for me was like one of the most special things of my life, and I did coach as a career choice for a while. That you can't make any money in it, even when you're trying to. You can't make any money in it. So the right way to do it is to find another
Volunteer.
job that you have where you don't need the money from coaching.
absolutely.
And so I love the way that you were able to do that. But it definitely cultivated a desire in me to find a career, like to align with a career path that allowed me to lean into some of those skills and strengths that coaching brought out in me. So, would you say that has also been true for you? Would you say that some of your favorite things that you've done along the way have been things that are similar to the
I
experience of
didn't
coaching?
I didn't search it out for that reason, but I really do enjoy that aspect of it.
Yeah.
I love the feeling. It's remarkable, especially remarkable with kids, but the feeling when somebody gets it.
Yes.
They've been struggling and struggling, whether it's hitting the curveball or how to work with clients, and then they start to get it, and then they get it. That's pretty great. My better half was a teacher for her whole career, and she retired last June, not a month ago, but 13 months ago, and she just loved that, and she misses it a lot. It's actually an interesting conversation, because the only reason she retired is because she was tired of saying goodbye to the grandchildren from across the country, and so she retired so we could move close. Um, but she still loved teaching and would still love to be doing it. Um, and so she doesn't regret the decision.
Yeah.
But it's still hard for her every, you know, when kids go back to school in August, she'll notice and it'll be
Yeah.
tough.
Yeah. What grade does she teach?
Mostly last 10 or 12 years, fifth, and that was her favorite. Over the years, she taught everything from first grade to high school.
So the spectrum of too young to really absorb where you are in the world to too old to listen to some stupid adult, right in the middle, that fifth grader where you can have some influence, right? And somebody might actually listen to you.
That's pretty much
And
exactly it.
and then 20 years later, you see that kid, and you're like, and the kid realizes you taught them something. It's probably pretty rewarding.
Well, especially she's been fortunate enough that she still hears from dozens of students, from including some that she taught when she was 22 and they were 18.
That had to be pretty fascinating. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
But you know that they're basically our age now.
Right.
And
decades older than Jess. I'll just remind her there.
Well, she was going to tell us if you didn't.
I'm just trying to preserve. Play, right? I'm trying to preserve my own ego by, taking the hit myself.
That's very cool. Yeah, I appreciate so much the educators that my kids have had that have had a love and a passion for what they do. It's very, very obvious and very different when you come across a teacher like that, and they've made a huge difference in my kids' lives every time we've had someone like that.
It was fantastic when she retired. We lived about a third of a mile from the elementary school she taught at, and when she retired, students and former students lined the street the whole way home to cheer for her.
Wow.
It was a pretty, kids still in caps and gowns from earlier in the day. It was pretty spectacular.
Yeah.
And if you know the young adult book Wonder, which became a movie, one of the great things Augie says is everybody deserves a standing ovation, and she really got one, which was pretty great.
Mark, have you seen that movie?
I have not seen that movie. I was having a different thought, actually, because I know Bob is, let's just say, interested in baseball. So I had the thought that she was like the Tony Gwynn of teaching.
Well, Tony Gwynn lived about a mile from us, and we used to see him around town a lot. And his daughter was a year older than mine, and that mile between us was a school dividing line, and his daughter played for the evil green school, and my daughter played for the perfect blue school, and that was the arch rivalry. Always the last game of the year, and so they played against each other many times, and Tony was always there up in the back corner of the gym with a video camera.
That's awesome, actually.
Just a normal dad,
Yeah.
And he was, not a lot of people know, he was an incredible basketball player too. He was drafted.
Yeah.
I think he still holds the San Diego State assist record. He was a point guard, and a really good one.
Interesting. Huh.
And anyway,
his baseball career wasn't too shabby.
that was not the wrong choice.
Right. He might have made a pretty good choice there. I was actually reading a story about Scotty Scheffler this morning, who apparently was a top-notch high school basketball and football player too. But he seems to have made the right choice aside from his most recent arrest.
Well, actually, the charges were all dropped.
I know. I'm just having fun. I don't think there's anything questionable about his driving skills. I would argue that there was something pretty questionable about the directions he was given, but that's a whole nother conversation and a deep rabbit hole we probably don't need to go down today. So Bob, I mean, your most recent exercise has obviously been chief investment officer. What led you to that decision to go do that? Because I mean, you've been an attorney, done a number of different. You could always go back to delivering papers. I mean,
well, when I worked in sales and trading, and initially on the trading floor in New York City, and then in California, and I did that for quite a while, and then Merrill Lynch was closing the San Diego office, and I had a chance to go to LA, but that was wrong for my kids. My older two had just made their varsity teams, and at a 4,000 student Southern California high school, making a varsity team is a really big deal.
That's right.
Sure.
And so if we moved, that would mean them starting all over and in a new spot. And we had moved to California when my kids were 5th grade, 4th grade, kindergarten. And the kindergartner and the 4th grader, my younger son and my daughter, easy adjustment. My older son, 5th grader, it was tough for him. And we just decided as a family that we weren't going to uproot everybody again and go to LA. Plus, San Diego's a pretty normal town. LA is not. And it was, I didn't think it was the best place to rear kids. So we decided not to. And that's how I ended up where I was, because I wasn't going to be doing any more sales and trading in San Diego because there wasn't any.
And was it Merrill that moved you to San Diego?
Yes.
Yeah. So you had the whole gamut of experiences within the big firm universe.
Oh yeah.
Am I reading between the lines enough to realize that you had a 5th grader, 4th grader, kindergarten? What time? How old? They were in high school at the time. Did high schoolers by then?
Yeah.
But were you without a job for a while? Were you looking?
Oh yeah, for a little while.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
that had to be interesting with kids in high school and preparing for college and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, it was.
In San Diego, which is not known as the least expensive city in America.
Last time I checked, no.
Yeah.
Fairfax isn't all that inexpensive either these days. I might opine.
No, but the people there think the real estate is very expensive compared to Southern California. It is not.
Believe me, I have a client who just dropped $4 million on a house in Orange County, and they say it needs a gut renovation.
What? Within a certain class of people, that is absolutely true.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, your basic. It's hard to find a basic suburban house in San Diego in a neighborhood with a school system you'd want your kids to go to for less than $1 million.
Right. Yeah.
That isn't to say you can't find a perfectly acceptable house in a perfectly acceptable neighborhood for less than that. You can.
Right.
But
Well, DC is relatively similar, right? When you get closer into the city, I mean, it's
yeah,
not that much different.
we live just outside the Beltway. The Beltway goes through our town,
Hmm.
so it's cheaper.
Yeah.
Our our house there cost about half what our California house sold for.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now
Yeah.
it's smaller and all that.
Right.
We didn't have
Yeah.
to have room for kids. All
That's right. That's
there are a
right.
lot of kids
You
there
just
a lot of the time, but
you just have to have
Yeah.
room at the cabin for kids.
yeah. Well, no, they show up at all hours in Virginia too.
That's
It's
amazing.
one of the fun things about being so close. I
Yeah.
usually start work early, and I'll be I'll be sitting working at 6:30, quarter to 7, and the front door will open, and one of the grandsons will come in and start talking and grab a snack because he's the religious runner. He runs twice a day, and it's about a mile from our house, a little less than a mile, our house to his. So he'll run to our house and eat and talk for a while, and then he'll run home. Um,
That's awesome.
That
I
is
love
a
that.
classic child act. Yes.
yes, and and that kind of stuff is pretty common. They've been known to show up at all hours, and that's
How
wonderful.
wonderful for you.
That's the way we want.
That's right.
Well, it speaks to cultivating family, right? That your grandchildren want to be around you like that.
Well, they
That's
mostly want to be around their grandmother, but yeah.
Yeah.
however you manage to attract them.
That's right.
Well,
That's
yeah,
right.
and I'm clear. I'm not above bribery either. You'll appreciate
That's,
this, Mark. The older three um, have decided they want to learn to play golf too. So,
I'll be there anytime, or you're welcome at Willow Oaks down here in Richmond anytime. Just come on down.
well, this is what you'll appreciate. There's a perfectly acceptable 9-hole track about 5 minutes from here,
Okay.
and for $60, each of them can play unlimited rounds as long as they're here. And for $257, I can play unlimited rounds all summer into the fall.
I'm just going to move up next to you. There's actually a nice little muni, an 18-hole muni, and I think Burke Lake, right on 123. It's probably not very far from you.
Yes, we have visited that driving range many times
Yeah, yeah.
while they've been learning to play.
What a wonderful thing. I will tell you, I wish I'd learned of many things. I wish I'd learned when I was a child. I wish I'd learned golf when I was a child because it's a doggone hard thing to learn as an adult.
Yeah, they all
But
swing pretty well.
right, because they don't care. You just go out there and hit the golf ball, which is there's probably a corollary in our business somewhere. What's the most
yeah.
What's the most interesting thing about what you do today?
Well, I mostly write, and I write later today. I'll write a weekly commentary that I've been writing for 15 years, and I haven't missed a week. Even when I'm on vacation, I write it. And I do a monthly and a quarterly and an annual, and that's all always great fun because writing is the best way for me to find out what I think and to organize my thoughts and make sure, writing many times has caused me to change my mind because I realize I couldn't support it in an organized, coherent way. So I figured it must be wrong. And, that's on a regular basis, that's the most interesting thing. An interesting thing that thankfully doesn't happen as often is watching human nature um, writ large every day. You know, um, I just contradicted myself, but I mean, in big ways, I don't see it every day. Thankfully, in little ways, I do. But you know, vendors of various investment programs trying to pitch me and watching how that works is always just fascinating. The marketing ploys, it's like LinkedIn is a joke because, at least for me, because of all the ridiculous pitches I get nonstop. And my email is a mess, you know, hundreds every day. And it's just like,
And I would imagine you spend a fairly considerable amount of time configuring your spam filter and blocking folks.
and they're better at finding ways around it than the
Finding ways around
bloggers
it.
are at.
Yeah, at least in our business, on our side of the business, the folks who peddle, um, I can, fill your calendar with qualified appointments are relentless.
One of the
It's
one of the things I love about writing, I'm curious to see if this aligns with your thoughts about it too, is when I'm writing, the only thoughts that I'm having to wrestle with are the ones that I've invited into my head. And the only opinions that of others that matter are the ones that I invite into the space with me when I include them in my writing. And that is a very peaceful, ends up being a very peaceful place for me. Because there's
I have never,
no,
I have never thought of it that way, but that's a fantastic point.
it really is. I'm because we all write, and I'm like, wow, that's actually pretty insightful.
and that
It's
I
not
can
huge
put that
I
out into
thought.
the world, and I can then, when I'm ready to put it out into the world, invite the opinions and thoughts of other people in. And if I'm in a reflective space, can then see where I might not have considered enough viewpoints, and then grow and learn from there. But it is very process based in that way, and it is not scattered, and it just feels really organizing and settling for me to have that.
And it's hard too because if you have to write about it, you have to decide to be done at a certain point. There's
That's the
always
hardest part.
Yeah.
there's always another rabbit hole to go down,
Yep.
um, and there are always ways to make it better. And
To
if I'm not time crunched, it's always great to put it aside for a day or two and then go back to it.
go
That
back
always
to it. That's
helps.
right.
But sometimes I'm time crunched and I can't do that. But you know, I go back to stuff sometimes years later, and you know, I may agree with the point, but boy, would I write it differently. You
Right.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's Jason Zweig of the Journal has a wonderful insights on writing, and it's like, you know, he calls it his exercise in self-loathing. Not not that he loathes himself all the time, but that that it's hard to say exactly what you want to say and exactly the way you want to say it. And that's always true, much less under time pressure. And but there's always
Mm-hmm.
something more to research. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm working on a big project, and I'm going down the rabbit hole of probability matching. And it's this bizarre esoteric idea that might or might not be relevant, but it's interesting.
Right. Yeah.
And that also becomes an excuse for not writing, right? Oh, I got more research to do.
Right. I don't know
Yeah.
enough yet. And I don't know how you do it, but within my Substack, every time I have an idea, I just create a post. And so you end up with this long list of really interesting things that you'd
Draft.
like to write about.
Yeah.
Not even a draft, just a one or two line, maybe.
Oh yeah.
I mean, call that a draft if you want.
Yeah.
But to both of your points, and to Jason Zweig's point, who's one of my favorite writers and has been for probably
Same.
since I picked up the Wall Street Journal originally 30 something years ago. Uh, you know, the introspection that's involved when you write, and the forcing yourself to really think logically about, can you support what you believe, is an incredibly valuable skill. And I would
Mm-hmm.
argue in the place and time where we are today in the United States, far undervalued as a necessary human skill,
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
no matter who you choose to support.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Guys, I'm
so,
gonna have to pivot, but please keep talking. Okay,
yep.
this is open. I'm not shutting this down,
Okay.
except for me. But I just need to pivot. My daughter's about to be out of her session,
So,
which
Bob,
uh,
you've been writing for a long time,
Yes.
um, professionally, and I would argue in the better letter, a lot of that is very personal. I mean, it's professional, yes, but it's very personal. Why did you choose to go down that path?
It was interesting. I I decided I wanted to write what I was interested in, and fortunately, there seems to be an audience that wants to read it. I have been exceptionally lucky um, in my writing. You know, every writer wants to be read, but I didn't start writing thinking I would be. Um,
Right. Yes. I
I
feel that personally. Yes.
I started to write mostly as a commitment device. I found as a CIO, I was giving a lot of the same advice over and over, and my memory told me that I'd always given the right advice, but I knew that couldn't possibly be true. So so I thought if I wrote it down in a place where it would always be there, um, it would allow me A, not to have to reinvent the wheel so often, but also B, more importantly, probably, I'd have a way to check my work later and to see um, if I'd really given the right device. And so I wrote for those reasons, not expecting an audience. And this goes back to Jason too, um, and to Tadas Viscanta at Abnormal Returns.
Hmm.
Tadas started um, linking my stuff. I think I'd been writing 30 days when he linked me for the first time, and I don't know how in the world he found it. Um, and that started to build an audience, and then not too long after that, I went to that year's CFA conference, and I got a message in the middle of the conference from Jason, who I'd never met, and said, "Hi, my name is Jason Zweig. I'm a fan of your work. Can we have lunch?" And and you know,
Wait a minute. How did you feel when you got that message?
I said, "Yes, let's go now. I'll get up and leave the session."
Can we
Um,
schedule one monthly for the rest of my life? Um,
and then a few months later, uh, in the online journal, he wrote a short piece saying something about people I read, and he listed 10, and I was one of the 10. And so I got a lot of new readers that day, let's just say.
I bet you did. I bet you did. Now, there was one piece that you wrote, and I should remember what it is, but I don't. The one I really like is The Forecaster's Follies, as you know, which I can't wait for January to come just so that you update it. But you wrote one piece that I think got you what I would loosely call a gajillion subscribers. Talk about that.
Which one do you mean?
I'm trying to remember. There was one you did a couple of years ago that I got you like 5,000 or 50,000 subscribers or some crazy number
The
just from the one edition.
it was probably the index mindset.
Yes, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah, I'm working on probability matching related to that issue.
Got it.
But yeah, it wasn't my phrase, but I don't know, the long or the short version. The shorter version, we have in modern life shifted to probabilistic thinking, and the probabilistic answer, while more likely to be right, is not necessarily the best answer. Because if we stuck with the probabilities, nobody would ever start a business.
Right. Yep.
No one would ever run for president, and nobody would ever fall in love, and all of those
All
things are
true. The failure rates are way too high.
important.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the big issues in our culture is an unwillingness to go for it. And so, if you're thinking probabilistically, you're going to hedge your relationship capital by keeping your options open, and you're not going to commit to somebody
Right.
for a
Then you never
future.
make a decision. And if you don't make a decision, you by definition can't get anything done.
Make a mistake, and you can't make a mistake.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
it's
yes, but you can't make a success either.
correct. And we can demonstrate mathematically that not making a mistake is more helpful than making an equivalent good choice. And so that's why in the NFL draft, for example, it almost always makes sense to trade down for more picks, because your failure rate's going to be significant. The problem is
Right.
you almost can't win without a franchise quarterback.
Right. And you're not going to get that. The Tom Brady's of the world are very few and far between.
That's right. And so you're going to have to go for it, and knowing that, well, back up a second. NFL scouts are really good at seeing who's not an NFL quarterback.
Right.
They don't see who is all that well. Depending on how you define it, first round draft choice quarterback failures are about 50-50. About half of them make it, depending on how you define it, and about half of them don't. And the list of those who become what we'd call franchise quarterbacks is far, far smaller than that.
Right. Yep.
So there you have to go for it. There are only a couple of instances where mediocre quarterbacks have won Super Bowls.
Right.
So to go back to the broader principle, figuring out how and when to go for it, even when the probabilities aren't in your favor, is a super difficult question. And, we also know mathematically that fat tails pretty much drive everything.
Right. Yeah.
But by definition, fat tails are really rare. So
right.
And especially in today's world, right? If we're talking about the about the 15th century, pretty much everybody had to go for it. But today, uh, it's easy to hedge, right?
Right.
You can get a Harvard MBA and go to work at McKinsey and make a ton of money and not have to go for it.
Right.
Uh, you
Yeah.
can live a really good life.
Yeah. You can.
And because of the way societies have been built. And that's mostly a good thing. But I think it's partly why marriage rates are down, childbearing rates are down. People are afraid to go for it. And I wrote about that, and it seemed to strike a chord.
Yeah. Well, clearly, um, I long for the day. Well, not really. I mean, I do want to be read as well. It would be fun to write a piece that got that kind of attention. Fortunately, I'm not pining over it. I just write what I'm interested in, and maybe it'll happen one day, maybe it won't. But that was really a wonderful piece, and I have my own little version of the Forecaster's Follies, as you know, um, and
Which I
and
love.
I've linked it up actually. After you write yours, I write mine. I put it in the same time frame, and I actually adopted, doing it every year. How do you've written obviously quite a bit of material over the years. How do you then go back? How do you even catalog or know what you've covered?
I don't. The short answer is I don't. Sometimes I remember, but not always. Um, and sometimes I'll think maybe I did, and I'll try to Google around and find it. And once in a while, I find something I had no idea I'd written about. And you know, I have over 1 million words out there now, so um, it's highly unlikely I'm going to remember a very high percentage of those.
But I think the reality is, from what I'm hearing you say, is let's just say you chose next week to cover a topic that you wrote about 10 or 15 years ago. I'm guessing that it's highly likely that what you write today would be really different from what you might have written then.
Yes, but let me qualify that. Fortunately, my substantive views about investing haven't changed all that much. I
Right.
would write about it differently. I might write it from a different angle. I might know more about it and have a more nuanced position than I did. Um, so yes, the short answer to your question is yes, it'll be different. Um, but in lots of cases, I'm thankful to say, not remark, not so different that it's a difference in substance so much as style.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Because I hear what you're saying. Your principles and values have remained stable. Your belief set in what you think works and doesn't work and what you think is smart and not smart hasn't really
Yeah.
changed. You just get deeper in maybe some of the finer points of, active versus passive or whatever path you go down. That's what I'm hearing.
Which isn't to say uh, I don't change my mind. I do, and I hope I'm willing to change my mind when the evidence suggests it. That's obviously easier said than done,
Yes, we all
or at
know
least it
something
should
about
be.
biases. Yes, which you've
But
actually written quite a bit about as well. What now that you are where you are, when you look back, would you change anything?
I would change any number of things. Um, I wouldn't have gone to law school. I hated being a lawyer. Um, I hated pretty much everything. No, I shouldn't say that. I really liked appellate work, and I was pretty good at it. But um, not a lot of people get to do that full time. Um, and I was extremely lucky to get into the financial world. I was a lawyer. I was representing CBS in a lawsuit against Viacom, and you're old enough to remember when we were kids and we'd get sick and stay home from school. Your 3 or 4 channel choices were soap operas, game shows, or old reruns. And CBS gave syndication rights to Viacom for the old CBS shows, Gunsmoke and Green Acres and all of them. And this is the early 90s, and VCRs were becoming ubiquitous, and the contracts which had been simply rolled over year after year with no substantive change, never contemplated anything like that. Viacom said, well, our syndication rights allow us to turn these into video cassettes and sell them and all kinds of stuff. And CBS said no, so there was litigation. It was going to be settled because the lawyers were terrified that their contracts didn't come up with the right decision, so on both sides. And so, of course, it was going to be settled, and but immense amounts of work needed to be done before that happened. And it was Christmas time, and I was going into New York City on the 6:20 in the morning train, and I was coming home on the 11:50. And I didn't much like being a lawyer anyway, much less like that. And I had gotten home early one night to go to a board meeting for a charity I was on the board for, and I was riding to the event with a buddy of mine who had a Wall Street job, and I was telling this story, and he says, gee, that's stupid. You should come work with me. And I said, well, I don't know anything about the markets or finance. And he said, that doesn't matter. And I said, but, I have a wife and 3 kids at home, and I'm paid pretty well. And he said, that doesn't matter. And so long story short, about a month later, I was on Wall Street.
So
with no finance background at all.
So that was where I was going. Your undergrad was in what?
Political philosophy.
Political philosophy. And then did you go to law school directly out of college?
Yes.
Okay. So you were following a typical, poli-sci, something, liberal arts, law school,
Yep.
attorney. So I was going to ask the question of what was the plan here, but I think you just answered the question is there was no plan. It was effectively a lucky accident that created this now long-running career.
Total fluke.
Total fluke, which is
or serendipity, depending on your outlook.
On your right. And I actually just wrote a piece about luck and financial planning, focused on the golfer Lilia Vu, right? Mm-hmm. You being a California guy, I don't know if you know who she is, but
yeah, it's a wonderful piece in The Athletic.
Yeah, terrific. And that's what triggered the whole thing, right? It's actually my wife that sent it to me because my wife reads the Times. I do not generally read the Times. But she sent that article to me, and it just triggered a whole. So there's just a piece of luck or serendipity, and here we are having this conversation. You're on your porch in upstate New York. Your 17 children and grandchildren are coming, and it's Seems like it's been a pretty good ride. How do you feel about your ride so far?
I have been remarkably blessed, especially given my parents' experience. Um, they were. I've written about this. The um, it's I stuff I didn't know till after they died, but my mother had grown up in an abusive household and graduated high school early at 16 to get married to escape. Um, she married an abuser. She had a son, and in the middle of the Great Depression, she left him with her son to escape the abuse. My father's story is even worse. Um, he he found his father having committed suicide in their barn when he was still in high school, and immediately quit school to support his mother and her subsequent string of husbands. Um, and they eventually uh, found each other in Jesus and made a remarkable life that seemed to me pretty normal, working slash middle class. I didn't know most of those details till after they had died, and it's remarkable to me the way they shielded me from it. And you know the odds are pretty high I could have been abused, and I
Right.
wasn't.
Yeah, they're actually very
uh,
high when you understand the
and
dynamics there. How did you get to Duke?
uh, well, my now much better half was a student at was a senior at Wake Forest, and that was the best. That was the top law school that was closest.
So, as
I
somebody
wish I
who's
had a better. I wish I had a better answer than that, but
that's funny.
it,
As somebody who
no, I
obviously
don't wish I had a better answer. I would like there to be a more academic answer to that, but
uh,
there's not.
understood, sometimes none of that matters. Um, so when you look at it today, you're somebody who's a planner, believes in financial planning, you know, very much I would say evidence based, quantitative kind of investor. But
Yep.
few of your life decisions were made in that mentality. They were luck, or there's this young woman that I want to be close to, or something like that, and none of it was
And you
rationally
know
drawn
what?
out in this spreadsheet.
It's the best decision I ever made.
Uh, uh, Bob, I
I,
couldn't agree with you more.
People tell me all the time, you know, what's the most important thing to success, and my answer is marry well.
I, 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 I will tell you, I was a twice flunked out college student managing a bar in Richmond, Virginia. I happened to have a poor tip week because our checks used to get mailed to us, right? There was no ACH. And went into the office of the restaurant in which I worked. There was this young lady that handed out my paycheck. I asked her if she wanted to go to dinner the next night. 3 weeks later, we were engaged. That's 40 years ago. Her mother was a GM of a Ford dealership, first female GM of a Ford dealership in the United States. She looks me in the eye and says, if you're going to marry my daughter, you're going to finish college. Barring that decision and her mother being who her mother was, you and I would not be having this conversation.
Yep.
I can't. And I dated somebody for 7 years. I got to Richmond because I was dating somebody who ended up going to sculpture school at VCU, and that never worked out. And I was never going to get married. I was never going to have children. Those things weren't going to happen. But for one fluky decision, hey, let's go to dinner. And if I hadn't needed my paycheck that day, or if she hadn't been the one to hand it to me, I mean, who knows where it would be? Who knows? I would agree with you that
I shudder to think.
I
Yeah,
do sometimes, but by far the
we
best
had
decisions I've ever made had nothing. There was no logic to them. My decision to go to community college and stop being an auto mechanic, I can't tell you how that decision was made. It just happened.
And we're 45 years.
Yeah, good for you. We'll
A
be
little over.
40 next June. And I couldn't
I'm
have
way too
imagined
young.
that.
I'm way too young to have been married that long.
Haha, you just made an early, you were an early decision to admit.
There you go. Yeah, I I scored with my reach school.
There you go. I have to say, I've most definitely, um, um, uh, I'm most definitely married up. That is for certain.
Oh,
Um,
there's no doubt about that.
and my wife is a woman of infinite patience, even today.
Yeah, that's true.
Anybody
In
who
my
will
case.
tolerate you laughing at your own jokes is somebody of infinite patience. Um, what else should we know about you and how you got here?
Um, there's there is always more luck, or if you want to spiritualize it, grace involved in success than such as it is, than we think or assume. And um, you know, one of our many biases is we assume um, what success we have is because of our own achievement, and our failures are bad luck. And and in my experience, it's usually the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
uh, our The good stuff is more luck than we like to think, and the bad stuff we typically deserve. um, and so um, my you know if I want people to remember something about my success, to the extent I have any, it's that um, it's more luck or grace than we think, and probably more luck and grace than we can know.
That's actually very powerful. Would you say there's a fair amount of that though is your own grace for and faith in yourself too? Is that part of it?
I've never thought of it that way. Um, I don't think so. Maybe you're right. I'll have to think about that some.
I don't know right or
Um,
wrong. I'm just, uh, you know, I do a fair amount of study on behavior, as I know you do, and it strikes me that just giving yourself grace when you make errors and when things don't go right is it feels to me like an important factor in just leading a decent and successful life,
that's probably true. I've
regardless of
never
your
thought of
outcome.
it.
I mean, you make a great outcome, you may get a bad outcome. You know,
Well, parents ask us a lot at our age, about child rearing, and um, the first answer is grace, but it's not the only answer, because I know lots of people who have uh, done a good job and done everything right and not had it turn out very well.
right? Yes, yes. That
Um,
is, there are certain things you
and
just cannot control.
and at some point, uh, kids, at some point, everybody makes their own decision. What clients, you can give the client the best advice in the world,
Right,
and you may have conveyed it in the best possible way, and they're still going to do what they want to do.
right. Yes,
And you can read the manuals that say something like, well, if they don't take your advice, you must not have conveyed it properly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I get the advantage to saying that, to get people to focus on saying it in the best possible way. But in terms of accuracy, it's a crock.
Yeah, no, I have to say, I mean, I don't remember who this quote is from. Uh, I know it's relatively famous, but I believe it, having seen it. I mean, I'm in the advice business, right? And I was before this. I was a tech consultant, and you're in the advice business too. You can't argue, you can't logically argue somebody out of a position they didn't logically argue themselves into. It's just not
Yep.
possible. You cannot change the mind of somebody who doesn't want to have their mind changed, and they can make terrible decisions doing it.
Yep.
And there's no point in
And
beating
you
our.
and I have done it too.
We've all done it.
Yep.
I'm just as guilty as the next. Is there anything else we should talk about before we call it a day and release you to your family? And thank you, by the way. This has been a marvelous conversation.
I nothing that sticks out. I'm sure I'll think of 12 things about 5 minutes after we hang up, but I think we've probably tortured the people enough.
Well, we will, of course, edit this down. What we are doing is Jess and I will kind of study the conversation and see what we can pull out around, interesting financial planning or kind of life points. A couple of notes, I took was that, your wife catching kids in the sweet spot of their learning cycle, kind of coaching and teaching, as it relates to investment decisions and financial planning. The
You
fact
didn't
that
ask me about being a waiter, though.
well, we haven't talked about being a singer waiter. As a matter of fact, thank you. We never covered that. So now we have to go spend 5 minutes on that, and then I know you've got family coming. We have to let you go. But tell me about the singing waiter. How did that come about? And
There is a place here in the Adirondacks, about 10 minutes from where I'm sitting. It's a family camp / resort, and they.
don't tell me you were in Dirty Dancing too. If you tell me that,
I was not. Nobody wants to see me dance. In those days they hired a couple hundred kids in the summer.
right.
Today it's like 300. And in those days, if you were on the music staff, and I was, you also waited on tables.
Got it.
So my job was to sing and to wait on tables, and it was great fun. I met my wife there. She was a violinist, and our daughter swore she would never meet her husband there, and lo and behold, she did.
Back to the luck or serendipity thing. If you don't choose to work at the camp and be a singing waiter, you don't meet your wife.
That's right.
And your daughter doesn't exist.
Exactly.
And without the camp, she doesn't have her husband. You don't have those grandchildren.
Yep. And it was 50 summers ago that I walked on the grounds for the first time to go to work there. My wife had been there her whole life. Her first visit was in utero.
Oh my goodness.
And I never went there before I went to work there, but it was 50 summers ago, right after I graduated from high school.
Just a few decades in Jess's terms. She unfortunately can't get back in, so we'll say goodbye without saying goodbye to Jess. But I thank you for joining us. This has been a wonderful conversation. And at some point, I'll do this announced. I would hope to be able to walk in your front door, because you're not very far from me, and shake your hand in person.
We'll absolutely do that, or we can meet somewhere for coffee or lunch, or
I would be more than happy to go see the Nats play the Padres someday.
The problem is they tend to do it when I'm up here.
Right, of course. Yeah.
And truly one of the hardest things about moving from San Diego is giving up my tickets.
As a longtime resident of Washington D.C. who moved down here, I believe me, I get that. We might just have to take a road trip. Of course, with all your family, you probably wouldn't want to take the time away and go to San Diego and see a ball game there.
I'm hoping to catch one when I go out to Future Proof.
You're going. I'm not. I'm not going. That doesn't fit my calendar. That's a shame. In any case, have a marvelous weekend with your family. Thank you for the time today.
Thank you, Mark. I'm happy to do it.
You're welcome, sir.